Are you going to play strong, controlling interviewer, and I'm going to play shy, struggling artist?
Exactly. I'm going to put you through the paces. I'm going to make you think it's going to be a terribly flattering interview. And then I'm going to go at you. I'm going to bring up so much shit I know about you.
Go for it.
Hey, this is Elliot Einhorn. Welcome back to the Talkhouse Podcast. Today I'm joined by
Nick Dawson, Editor-in-Chief of Talkhouse Film. And the guys you just heard were Griffin Dunne and Simon Baker. Griffin Dunne about to just get in there and destroy the life of Simon Baker.
It's going to get dangerous.
It's going to get dangerous. It's going to get hazardous. It's which is fitting for, I guess we should talk about
Let's jump right in.
Let's just jump right in. So the reason for this podcast is Simon Baker's feature debut as writer-director. He is, of course, best known as the lead in The Mentalist, your favorite CBS show of the past decade.
He was also in The Ring 2.
He is, I kind of hate him. So here's the thing, because he is like absurdly handsome, has the best hair, is ridiculously nice in real life. And now it turns out he's a very, very skilled writer-director as well. And he also acts in this movie, Breath, as part of a very strong supporting cast, including Elizabeth Debicki. This movie is an adaptation of a book by Australia's greatest novelist, Tim Winton. It's about a couple of kids, Looney and Pikelet, who are aspiring surfers who are taken under the wing of this guy, Sando, played by Simon Baker. And it's about sort of their friendship and the mentor relationship. And it's just a really beautifully made coming-of-age movie and a great surfing movie as well.
Now, Nick, you just saw this recently, as I understand, sitting a couple seats over from the one and only Hugh Jackman.
That is true. I tried not to watch him watch the film because he hadn't seen it. And he's buddies
That's our next podcast series.
Yeah, watching Hugh Jackman watch movies with Nick Dawson. Not creepy at all. Anyway, quickly moving on. So yeah, Simon Baker, just kind of all-around nice guy. And another of his friends is Griffin Dunne, who initially made his mark as an actor in movies like American Werewolf in London, After Hours, Who's That Girl with Madonna.
Of course.
Then sort of transitioned into being a really capable director of a bunch of romantic comedies and non-romantic comedies as well. Addicted to Love, Practical Magic, The Accidental Husband.
And most recently, the documentary Joan Didion, The Center Will Not Hold, about his aunt and one of America's most brilliant living writers.
So Griffin and Simon have been buddies since they met during the making of Practical Magic like 20-odd years ago. And they just sat down and had a really fun chat.
The guys really jump right in. And it was so cool hearing these actor-turned-directors discussing that exact switch and how directing really superseded as their main passion.
Right. Simon talked about this thing of really watching directors like a hawk, he said, like really observing the way that they work and being a sponge for, the way that you construct a film. And it's fascinating because I feel like he has approached his acting career as a filmmaker in a way, and now he's able to put all that knowledge to such good use in Breath.
Well, it was also cool to hear about how during the filming of that movie, he's working with non-actor kids who are not trained for the screen.
Right. This is like one of the great surfing movies, if not the greatest, because it is completely authentic. And in order to do that, what he needed to do was to have kids who really knew how to surf and then find just the right great surfers for those roles. And he does a brilliant job of directing them and sort of eliciting very genuine performances from these two kids.
We also hear Griffin's hilarious story about having the big talk with his father when he was 8 years old.
Yeah. Some of my favorite moments recording podcasts is when the engineer, whoever it is, and in this case, it was our good friend Mark Yoshizumi, where I looked over and he was red in the face, stifling a laugh. Because it was, I'm not going to spoil it, but it was amazing. And completely came out of left field as well, which just made it all the better.
They also talk about coming-of-age movies and outgrowing them.
How directing is like running a nation.
How human cinema will indeed outlast superhero franchises.
I sincerely hope that is the case.
Should we run the tape?
Let's run the tape.
Simon.
Griffin. Good to see you.
Good to see you, man. It's been a while.
Huh?
Way too long. I totally loved your movie. I mean, I know I'm brought here to talk to you about it, but thank God I really loved your movie.
Yeah, it's lucky, right? You can't lie for 45 minutes.
Yeah. I wonder, you and I both actors, and we both made our first films, and I've made others, and I wondered if you felt when you were directing that you really like found yourself, and like if you liked it so much more than acting, you thought, okay, this is all I want to do. I'll put acting. I care less about acting.
I kind of felt that way before I got an opportunity to direct. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know, initially I started acting or I had the desire to want to act because of my experience in the cinema as an audience member and how I could be transported by a character and a story and moments and situations, and cinema had the potential to articulate things that I didn't know how to articulate, but I understood in my core some way, and it articulated it for me, and it was some kind of catharsis, like an exchange of communion in that experience as an audience member.
Yeah, I felt, having been, an actor with struggling in success, that uneven insecurity, the total all consumption of directing a movie was for me like coming home. I mean, I felt like I got to play every part without having to put on the makeup.
Yeah.
And it was extremely addicting, and I went through extreme withdrawals when I wrapped, and when I finished editing and it was out, it was like, now what do I do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh shit, I have to have conversations with people.
I'm at a loose end. I got to fill time.
Yeah.
Till something else grabs me and takes hold of me.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'd felt that urge a long time ago to want to get, as soon as I was on sets as an actor, I was intrigued by the process of how everything comes together and the manifestation of moments and situations. And I like photography and I like equipment, and I love the power of editing.
Yeah.
And so I would watch every director I ever worked with like a hawk. And, I guess in a lot of ways it took me a long time getting the confidence to be able to step into the chair, because it's very easy when you don't have that responsibility to sort of be Monday morning quarterback and say, well, I would do it like this. And as you know, when you get on the set and you got 200 people standing there going, what do you want? What do you want with this? What do you want? It's different.
You've been working on it so long. I mean, I remember you talking about this. When did you option the book? I mean, I know
it was about 8 years ago.
8 years ago, yeah.
So development was a while.
Did you always adapt it? Know you're going to write it, or did you have writers and then you came in?
I had an overall sort of perspective on it, but I worked with writers, and then it got to a point where the last writer I had, who's credited Gerard Lee on the film, he had to step off and go and work with Jane Campion, and then I sort of took over from there. And in a lot of ways, from the beginning being involved, I had a very clear perspective about what the film had to be and how it ended, and where that big brave moment is for that kid is about, deciding not to do something.
Yeah,
is the bravest
really
moment
powerful
in the film, as opposed to being the obvious hero's journey, which would be to go out and conquer it. This movie was not about that.
Yeah. There were two remarkable things about the movie that I want to talk to you about. One is the casting, and the other is like the surfing. It's the best surfing in a narrative film I've seen, and I don't think I've ever seen a surfing movie where the movie stars actually, those guys were really surfing, and those waves were enormous, and how that must have been extremely dangerous, like to shoot, like how were the mechanics of that? Because you guys were all like, these 10-foot waves were right there in the shot with you, and I love the way you captured the continuity of waves and the way they would, I'm a terrible surfer, but I grew up surfing in LA. And that thing of getting your ass kicked, trying to get out to the wave, and then the breath, being the calm, and then catching the right wave. It was, and then you'd see these kids really up there doing it. Both of them surfed that well?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it took a year to cast these guys. And I knew, I'm a lifelong surfer and, I've always had a very strong and potent relationship with the ocean. And it's a major part in forming who I am. And it still is. So authenticity was an important part of the story for me. I couldn't do it unless I could do it authentically, because I've seen every narrative film with surfing in it, and I've always felt a little bit...
I always see him fake it.
Yeah, I've always felt a little bit like disappointed.
Double.
Yeah,
the stuntman.
Or they go with what I refer to as surf porn, this sort of glossy, perfect scenario, which it isn't. It's powerful, it's alluring one day,
and it's messy,
it'll kick your ass the next
And
day.
I love the underwater photography was incredible.
Well, that's another whole world that just exists out there that we experience, that world. And it was really important to try to, because I knew that would be cinematic.
Yeah.
That whole world that exists under there where sound is pulled back and everything seems slower and more vivid.
Well, it looks like a rabid, vicious storm that's going on under the sea.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't know you were looking at underwater, you think you'd be looking at a turbulent sky. That was just where just a terrible hurricane, terrible weather conditions going to happen. But that's what exists under the water that, is throwing you around. When you were shooting the surfing, was that like on the schedule, one day, all day surfing on the water? How does that work?
You think you can't control nature like that.
Yeah.
It's like we'd wait and you can sort of, like any weather, you can predict what's coming 5 days out. It shores up and gets more clarity 2 days before, a day before, and then you pull the trigger that morning. Okay, we're going to go into the ocean and we're going to shoot these scenes. And then you're flying by the seat of your pants. You've got to be quick and you've got to be flexible because it can change on a dime. And next thing you know, and a couple of times we were out there and we had horizontal rain and 50-mile-an-hour winds that we were just, okay, we're going to get out of here.
Yeah.
We'll run inside and do some,
Were there ever any waves that were actually, oh shit, I don't want to take that one?
Yeah, but it was far more with the surfing stuff and those scenes. You have to be kind of relaxed with the narrative and be flexible, because essentially you're going to get what footage you can get, and that's it. So you've got to work a little bit with, almost like with found footage, to restructure scenes. There might be a bit more intricacy in the written scene, but you've got to reduce it down to what is this scene about, which is this great exercise anyway, because it's what we do as actors all the time, and so I've only got 4 shots to tell this story. I've got 2 shots to tell this story cohesively. I want those shots to be authentic. So the ratio of what you use with the surfing stuff, it's what is it on land? It's maybe 4 to 1, right? So it's maybe about 25 to 1 of what you shoot. You got water on lenses. You got all these things that can go wrong. Someone drifts in this direction. You can't hear each other. I'm out there the whole time as well, yelling at these kids because they can't hear me. A set comes half the time, like Nautilus, we're in a kilometre and a half off the coast, and yeah, we had some hairy moments.
Oh yeah, it must be. It also just sounds.
But there's nothing like, I had to have non-actors. These guys had never acted before.
Yeah.
They were surfers. It took a year to find
So
them.
did you start, I'm going to find surfers first and then see if they can act?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I want to find charismatic kids that can surf, and then we won't teach them to act. We'll just allow them to be them.
Well, you sure did.
Allow them
both
to
of them
be
were
actors.
incredible.
But a very different set to what we're normally used to. Not a mark on the set. It was, you create an environment where, that sort of military kind of approach to filmmaking. It's a lot of rigor to it. That was all pushed aside. So it was relaxed. It was loose. I shot a lot of rehearsals. Sometimes I would just, I wouldn't let the AD and the camera crew panic about slating. It's like, you know what? What's most important is the footage we get. It's not about how it's slated. Save it to the end. If I say roll, if I wink at you 3 times, roll the bloody camera, right? Because there might be some stuff.
Where'd you find Looney?
Western Australia, just, shy, super shy kid. Over a year, I got down to 6 kids for the 2 roles. We flew them all to Sydney, had a 2-day workshop. And at the end of the second day, I brought my DP in with a decent lens and the Alexa, and we shot some scenes, a lot of I read scenes with them, improvised stuff, played around. And on the Saturday night, after the first day of the workshop, I sat there with a drama teacher that I'd worked with as a young actor, this great Greek guy, Nico Lathouris, wonderful guy. And we had dinner, and I said, well, we've got 2 guys that might be Pikelet. We don't have a loony. And I said, but there's something interesting about this kid, Ben Spence, who ended up playing loony. Can you work with him in the morning? I'll work with the other guys. We'll play around. And he arrived. As soon as the camera came, he just figured out what acting was.
That's like great.
It just landed in him. He goes, this is just fun.
Yeah, he was mesmerized. He was both funny and menacing and kind of a shit.
Vulnerable.
And vulnerable.
Yeah.
I've always been drawn to coming-of-age stories. I think possibly now I'm in my early 60s. I've probably outgrown it. But early Truffaut films, the very first film I ever did was, kind of an autobiographical coming-of-age thing. It was a short. And I did this film, Fierce People, with Anton Yelchin, who was at the time 15. Mm-hmm. And it made me think of your movie because he had his first love scene with a peer on camera before he'd ever had a love scene in real life. I mean, he was a virgin. And so directing a boy in a love scene, of which Pikelet had more than a few, was probably one of the most beautiful women I ever saw in my life, by the way. I love that Elizabeth. And then having him not be, experienced as an actor. What was that like on the set for you as a director to create that kind of trust and intimacy, and also a very dark aspect with, sexual suffocation or whatever. I don't even know what the name of that is.
Autoerotic asphyxiation.
Autoerotic asphyxiation.
Yeah.
Yeah. What? Tell me about that.
Well, I had a sort of a 10-day rehearsal period with these guys, and it was just basically going through a process of going through the script and an awareness of the story more than anything, and just getting familiar with where they are as characters in each moment. Just a foundation, really. And on the way home from rehearsals at one point, I was in the car with Samson, who plays Pikelet, and I had to have a bit of a chat with him because I knew this stuff was going to come up. And it scheduled it later in the shoot, in the last sort of 10 days of the shoot. And these guys had learnt over the course of the learning curve, watching these guys grow on a set from day to day was just profound. I mean,
Well, you're capturing them in real life at a turning point in any kid's life.
Yeah, but they're actually
such a significant age,
they're kind of
and you're
living
filming
it. They're living the experience of me being mentor, as well.
And you're the mentor character
in the
of
film,
course, yeah.
And they're developing this sense of responsibility. They're going to work every day. They go to work at 5 a.m, and there's this sort of, and you saw them, and they wouldn't allow their own parents to come to the set. They just wouldn't do it. They were like, leave, you can't be here, because they were growing into young men. So I had this drive home with Samson. I said, look, we're going to have some conversations about a few different things, and I want you to know that whatever we talk about, it'll be in confidence. And I was trying to be very delicate about the subject, around the subject, just sort of making him aware that it's going to happen and we're going to have to talk about these things. I said,
how old is he?
Fine. He was 16 and a half at the time.
Okay.
And he cut me off and he just said, and this is the kind of kid he is, he cut me off and he goes, look, I know what you're talking about. You don't need to worry about anything. He just said that to me and I was like, okay. And then he went to go on it. I don't need to know anymore, mate. As long as you're okay, I'm okay, and we'll talk about it as it comes. And by the time we got to that moment, he's a really confident kid. And I think there's an aspect of, because these kids had grown up surfing, there's a real physical awareness, there's a physical confidence to them. Right. And that's sort of why I had to cast non-actors in those roles, because in the 70s, kids were more present in the moment. They were alive, like you would have experienced it.
Sure. Well, there were less distractions.
They're not hiding. They're not disappearing into
they're
something.
They're not looking at a screen. They're not checking out how they're being perceived by total strangers. They don't,
Right. They're thrusting themselves into the world.
Yeah.
Right. And kind of in a physical way, because their presence is completely there. Another thing that was really interesting for me about casting, having non-actors on the set, is that all the actors, if they're acting, it sticks out like dog's balls against these non-actors. And suddenly it's like, you know that scene in East of Eden with Natalie Wood and James Dean, and they're sitting in the grass together, and she's acting so sort of mannered and perfectly, and he's this sort of new school mumbling naturalism. That's what it looks like when you put an actor next to them. So you've got to measure the level of performance of acting next to this naturalistic stuff. So everyone else's game.
If you get it like that, it must be. Your story about your car ride, explaining the facts of life, reminds me of my dad explaining me the facts of life. And he said, it was very similar to yours. He said, listen, Griffin, we gotta talk about something. It's going to be kind of awkward, but I think it's important. I said, I already know. I'm about 6 or something, 8, I don't know. He goes, what do you know? He goes, no such thing as Santa Claus. I went, yeah, well, that's true. But the thing I want to talk to you about is, you see, your mother has a vagina, and I have a penis, and I take my penis, and the way you were born, I put it inside and I go, wait, what does this have to do with Santa? I just totally freaked me out. I had to share that.
Two worlds just got exploded.
Exactly. One and after the other. It just occurred to me, just going back to the kid thing for a sec, they sent the parents away. Do you, when you work with kids, who aren't emancipated or under 18 or 17, I forget what it is, you have to have a guardian. They've got all these like school things, and a trailer has to be there for school. Did you have those kind of restrictions on how many hours you can work and all that kind of stuff? Yeah. Did those apply?
Yeah, absolutely.
I did.
Yeah. So we had Looney was 15 and 9 months. He had to be 15 and 9 months to do the role, because he smoked cigarettes. And then Pikelet in Western Australia, and state to state, he had to be 16 to do the sexual stuff. And, his parents were aware of it. They were obviously allowed to be on set if they wanted to. That was about their own agreement between, mum and dad and kid. And the kids and Samson was like, I don't want you here. And they were okay about it. There was one interesting moment, and it sort of speaks a lot to that idea of becoming your own person, is that there's a scene where he's chopping firewood, Pikelet, and Samson's from the city. He's a city kid. He was not much good at chopping wood, and we had to teach him. And he'd been practicing, and he's out there splitting the wood, no problem, going through it like butter. And then his parents showed up onto the set and sat by the monitor, and he saw them. And suddenly he couldn't cut the wood anymore. It just wasn't, every time he'd swing the axe, it just wouldn't split. And it was like someone had taken his energy out. And I went over to him, and I looked at the first AD, and he's a salty guy. And he looked at me and raised his eyebrows, like, this is curious. And I went over to Samson quietly. I said, you're right. He's like, yeah. He's that kind of kid. And I said, you want me to, is it because your parents are here? You feel self-conscious? Like, no, it's all right. Anyway, he kept going. He couldn't get through it. And he was starting to get a bit embarrassed and flustered. And I went over quietly to the parents and said, I think you guys should make yourselves scarce. And they left, and he saw that they'd left. And as soon as they were gone, bang, straight through the wood again.
Fascinating.
So it's just like this sort of strength that he gained being at work in an environment that he felt safe and confident to be his own person. He'd lost that as soon as his parents.
That's beautiful.
The presence of
I
his
have the
parents.
exact opposite of a story of when I was directing. We're all kids in this movie called Fierce People. When I was directing Anton, he has a moment where he's been raped by Chris Evans' character. And he's just filled with shame, and there's a shot of him like losing his shit, just crying hysterically under a tree. And he kind of had to, he didn't have anything to draw from. I mean, he hadn't even been, there was like, I couldn't say, so now in the scene, this guy raped you and he put you, he couldn't give a direction like that to a 15-year-old kid. And so he was also, I've got my big crying scene. He kept calling it my crying scene coming up. So he's already really worked up about it. And I was kind of like wondering how to guide him, because I really needed him to go to some place and become emotionally hysterical.
And you've got to get it.
And I got to get it. I mean, the whole thing is building. And his mother, the Russian woman, a defector from the Soviet Union, was a ice skating star in the Soviet Union. They're very, very close. And she said to me as we're kind of setting up, she goes, "You're nervous about the scene, are you?" I went, "Yeah, I kind of am. Do you have any advice?" She goes, "I would never say this, but if you'd like, would you like me to talk to him?"
Whoa.
I said, "Yeah, I'll give that a shot." So we're about ready to go. She goes, "I want to talk to him right before you roll." I said, "Okay." And she goes, "I don't know what they're saying." I could have listened. I took my cans off. And they're having this conversation, and they're going back. And I see him go, and I see him. And then she walks away, and he just loses his shit, loses it. And I film it, and I think I maybe shot it twice. I mean, I already got it the first time. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what she said to him. I didn't ask, but it was like, that's how that worked. That was the good side of having a parent on the set with a young kid.
So I have a question, because this movie found me. This project found me, and it grabbed me, and it took hold of me, and there was a process that you're immersed in it completely. And there was a point where I said to my wife Rebecca, I think about maybe 5 or 6 weeks into the cut, I said, "I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to make another movie, because I don't think I'll ever find something that I love as much as this." And it's like when you have a kid,
yes.
And you go, "I don't think I can ever have another kid, because I don't have any more love in me, because this kid has all my love. Where does it come from? Yeah. Where does that extra energy come from?" And we were talking earlier about the idea of the emptiness at the end, and then how do you pick up the pieces and move forward, and then what is it that kicks you into the next thing? And one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to you about this is because you're an actor that moved into directing, but you've also you've made a bunch of films and documentaries, so you keep working. And you keep finding these things that are important enough to you that capture you. And I'm wondering if it's more the case of looking, or like for me, it's sort of leave town and the doorbell rings.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, after finishing my first film, I had that emptiness because everything was filled. And I was so complete. And then having it be empty, it reminded me of the thing I hated about acting, which was, where's my next job going to come from? Mm-hmm. Only this was like withdrawal 10 times worse, because it was like, where's my next, country that I'm going to run come next? Where's my next nation? Yeah. So looking is what I've done, constantly looking, and with the underlying subtext of like, what if I don't love this as much as I love the other one? Mm-hmm. What if I'm in the middle and I kind of don't give a shit? Mm-hmm. What if, is this material going to be strong enough? But when you do look, because there's a lot of stuff to look at, but when you do look, do you find that you have like a kind of an area that you're looking in, like you create parameters of like, I want to do something that fits in this world, or I don't, Well,
Because otherwise it's just throwing spaghetti at the ceiling.
yes,
really, isn't it?
I read a lot. I read a lot of books, and my tastes and interests in books are like all over the place. It'll be nonfiction, fiction, and I find that the books that really mean a lot to me usually have the themes that will mean a lot to me in a movie, and they will be pretty diverse. They'll be, I've yet to make a historical period movie, but I would love to make a historical period movie, about someone like Grant, who's like such a wildly complicated, figure. And I think about, what is it about that character? Why do you want to make a thing about a president and a Civil War hero? That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is this guy thought he was a failure. And when it came time, he had stuff inside of himself. He had leadership and characteristics he never even knew he had that could lead a nation through a civil war and become a president. And it's that arc, that character arc. And if you can find something like that in a coming of age, there was a period I mentioned I like coming of age. That's all I used to think about was coming of age. And I went, I've outgrown coming of age.
Yeah.
That's weird. I'm not interested in that anymore. I'm not interested in stories about old guys either. But I think about death all the time. So it's usually your life.
Yeah.
You know what? It doesn't have an obvious. It doesn't. Life doesn't have genres.
No.
It's like I'm only interested in a comedy with heart. That's in a way a bigger bowl of spaghetti.
Yeah.
It's more like where you're at in your life, and the thing still finds you. You'll still have it finds you, but it'll have a better chance of finding you if you're also looking.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, I guess, once you have something, well, for me now, I have something kind of behind me and I'm having that feeling. I feel satiated. I feel a bit full, Maybe I'll have a decaf macchiato or something and sit back and have a rest. But that's not going to be for long because I know myself too well.
Sure.
And that emptiness will be there. Although it'll be a happy emptiness because I have done something. But the idea of going, well, I want to do something completely different. And I know that even if it's completely different, it still has to have those elemental components to it that are about, humanity, that connect in some way. It might be an extraordinary character like Grant, but the extraordinary thing about that is that historically we know it has an extraordinary story, but he still just has that humanity, and there was that thing that clicked within him that is a very human thing that is relatable to most people. And they all live with that within them in a way. And I think that is always going to pop up. And I think in a lot of way that is the thing that drew me to movies in the first place. And I think it's, maybe I'm an optimist, but that's the element that will keep the movies being viable in the future. And that when it's all said and done and the world of superheroes, starts to wear thinner and thinner. And I think there's always going to be a place for that spectacle. But within it, the idea of humanity on a screen and the celebration of individualism on screen is still going to keep it alive and keep it potent.
Yeah, I do too.
So you're Joan doc,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
About your aunt.
Yeah.
Right? The idea to pursue that was nostalgic, emotional.
Growing up with Joan Didion as your aunt, and her husband John Gregory Dunne. We're talking about the 70s. I mean, when I was a kid, and I was just those boys' age, John and Joan were, my idols. And they were so cool. They were like, writing about Manson and covering wars, and they give parties for Tom Wolfe and Janis Joplin who'd come to the house. And they always included me in that. It was like, that's when I made my first short. It was a coming of age story where I was at that very party. for Tom Wolfe that John and Joan gave. And they were incredible to me. I mean, really towering figures. And then, John died and Joan's daughter died. And I became, I grew up and we became peers. And she became my aunt, who I was now looking after as well. And I knew we made a short movie together that she asked me to do to promote Blue Nights, her last book. And it was during that time I realized there was never a documentary about this woman that has been such an influence on so many other writers and on so many other lives. So many young women who read Joan Didion for the first time. It transforms their lives, and I hear those stories over and over again. And so there'd never been a doc about her for the simple reason is she never allowed anyone to do a doc. So when I asked her, she said yes, because I would be the only person who could make it, who she would be comfortable enough with.
Oh, and she's so beautifully candid in those interviews.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then to get the perspective of your experience within the documentary as well, there's an intimacy to it that's really moving.
Yeah.
That takes someone that is an icon and brings them into such a personable place.
Yeah, I was really happy that happened.
In a satisfyingly personal place where, they say, like, never meet your icon. It can always be disappointing, but this is not at all disappointing. It's great. It's exciting to see, how candid she is and how vulnerable she allows herself to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that was very much what I was hoping would come out when you're making a doc. It's so different than making a narrative because you walk away from a scene with actors and you've got it and, on to the next. When you're interviewing someone, it's particularly your aunt, or a family member who's gone through a lot of tragedy and been and such a important person in an intellectual level, you walk away never really sure if you got it or not. And you can't keep going back, hey, Joan, I forgot to ask.
Yeah.
But one aspect about her personality and her character that I wanted is I grew up and she was funny and laughed like all the time. And people who think of Joan, who just read her or might, see her picture, just picture her as this, mistress of doom. And she writes about such dark, fatal things. The person I saw is the one that I got to show people on camera.
Yeah, yeah. And then also, I guess, the choice of, you had a lot of great old footage that you could use.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure there was probably a lot more that,
There was indeed. I always knew it was going to be heavily archival. But those films, the like home movies, a lot of people think that was like our personal home movies. They were actually Roddy McDowell's. You had a little Bolex, and he would just shoot these parties of all these people in the 60s. And somebody released them all to YouTube, and I happened to come across them, and I went, holy shit, that's my mother. That's my father. That's look at John. I mean, they were all there. I mean, and it goes on. Anyone can look them up. It captures a period of Hollywood.
Yeah.
From 64, 65, 66, 67, of all these like extraordinary writers and directors and movie stars, all at like the peak of their lives. Everybody, Jane Fonda, all these people, they're all just like glowing. They're just smoking and drinking on the beach and playing with, their dogs and their young children. And it's so beautiful to see.
16 mil, not 8 mil?
No, it was 8 mil, but it was a handheld Bolex.
Yeah, I know the ones.
Yeah. And anyway, it's just a timepiece. It makes you want to weep looking at this because, everybody's gone. And you just see them at the zenith of their lives,
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Just like us.
Well, I have a lot of that Super 8 footage of
Yeah, don't hang on to it, man.
Well, I have one of your weddings.
Oh, which one? All right, let's get out of here.
Griffin Dunne and and Simon Baker. Thanks so much to those guys. That was a fantastic conversation.
Listeners, we are dropping fantastic conversations for you each and every week, including next week, Abby Jacobson of Broad City in conversation with Samantha Irby. And after that, recorded live at Rough Trade in London, The Raincoats in conversation with Proto Martyr. You can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are served.
And of course, while you're on the interwebs, check us out on Facebook,
Twitter,
Instagram,
and YouTube, where you can find full video episodes recorded live at the Sonos store here in New York.
and of course, drop by talkhouse.com daily for all kinds of written goodness.
Today's episode is recorded and co-produced
By Mark Yershizumi. Thanks, Mark.
Till next Thursday.
We'll see you then.